It's so sad to be like not in person. Although I feel like we're getting great numbers, but I miss seeing people's faces.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. All right, well, we're rocking and rolling. Look at this. We've got 17 people in. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, Adam Oates, how did your hiring go? Oh, I see he's unmuted.
Oh, you had stepped away.
I had to shut the door. We're putting it on hold for a little bit and kind of reevaluating the department to see if we need a CTO or not.
Okay.
I just had two internal applicants then.
Oh, gotcha.
All right, let's see what we got. We got 26 people in here. Let's go ahead and we'll wait just another 30 seconds or so. Public records. Look at that. Let's design a PowerPoint. Let's make that really big. That much bigger. Look at that. All right, well, let's see. We got 29 people in here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the session today is public records with Professor Shannon Tufts from the UNC School of Government. But the class today is sponsored by Nutanix. So let me just give you a little brief overview. Of who they are. But Nutanix is a global leader in cloud software and a pioneer in hyper-converged infrastructure solutions, making computing invisible anywhere. Organizations around the world use Nutanix software to leverage a single platform to manage any app at any location at any scale for their hybrid, private, and multi-cloud environments. So if you get a chance to go visit Nutanix in their booth, please go over there, visit them, and let them know that you really appreciate them to sponsoring this conference. I don't have an intro for Shannon. I don't think she needs one, but here's Shannon Tufts.
I don't know. Some people might not actually know me. So if you don't know me, I'll give you a very quick rundown of who I am. Are you guys seeing my screen, or did I just start sharing something without actually hitting share screen?
Not yet.
Okay, that was me. That was like completely screwing that up. So I'm Shannon Tufts. I'm a faculty member at the School of Government, and I teach on a variety of different topics. I'm also a member of the Strike team. So they're all doing a PowerPoint. We actually were working on PowerPoints last night at about 11 o'clock last night, because, you know, that's when we all get our work done. And so they were working on theirs, and I was like, well, who's going to help me write mine? But I decided to write it myself. Although this topic is something that I'm hoping will be really interactive. So I want you guys to feel free to unmute yourselves and just start asking questions, because I feel like there's so much going on right now with public records that I could take this in any number of directions. I can make a 3-day class out of this content, but certainly want to make sure that I answer whatever questions you guys have. So if anybody has a question they want to kick off with, otherwise, I'm going to go into my content, but I just want to make sure if anybody's got a question that is something that you're running up against from a public record standpoint, and you want just some brainstorming with the group, or you want me to offer you some insight into the law of public records, certainly happy to do that. So please feel free to just jump in and ask questions as you may. Okay, Darren's got a question. All right.
Nope, I'm just gonna tell everyone, if you put it, if you can jump in like she asked, but if you put it in the chat, Shannon, I'll keep an eye on the chat for you.
Okay, great. Does anybody have something? Because I want you to unmute if you do. Like, actually ask a question. I'm gonna call on you. I'm gonna call on Thomas or Matthew or Adam. I see all y'all's faces right here, right now.
They respond better when you throw candy at them.
I don't have.
I would like to know about the time frame required to return a public data request?
Oh, great question. And let me see, who was that asked that question?
It's Jackie Phillips Hayes. or
Hey,
Jacqueline.
Jackie. Okay, so the law is not specific around how fast you have to return it. It says in a reasonable amount of time. So what does that mean? You can't say, I'm not going to produce the records request until all of my other work is done. You're actually supposed to start working on it as part of the normal course of the business day. But and sort of the way we advise around this, and Darren probably is a great test case of this, when you have a records request that comes in with hundreds of thousands of records that are, let's say an email request comes in, and it's for every email sent and received from the county manager's email account, right? So when that comes in, usually when you start trying to pull those requests, because you're going to pull the request from an IT standpoint, most likely, because most people don't know how to pull the request outside of the IT department. So you'll pull the request from the IT standpoint, and then people need to go through and review those items. And so either it's the individual sender and receiver, so the individual custodians of the record, it might be the attorney and the clerk to the board that are going to go through that, or it might be some other group that you guys have designated. So they're going to go through and try to redact records that should not be produced, right? So we'll talk about what should not be produced as we go through this. And so one of the things that we run into is sometimes those records requests may take months and months to actually produce. And it's always allowable for you to go back, not you guys are not the custodian of the records just because you're the IT department and you house the record. But it's advisable for public information officer, the clerk, whomever they made the request to go back and say, can you narrow your scope? Maybe with keywords, maybe with dates, because in order to produce the records request in an expedient way, we really need to reduce it down from 4 million records, right? So that's something that's always advisable and allowable. So Jackie, sadly, I have no good answer for you other than the law says, and as you know, as in a time frame that's as expedient as possible. Essentially, they don't say you only have 10 days to get it produced. That is not something, and the requester cannot put that burden on you either, because it's part of your normal business operations to produce that request. It doesn't mean you stop all other work, but it doesn't mean that you ignore the request and just do it off hours either. So that was a really dancing sort of way to answer that.
I've got a couple questions.
Yeah, Jackie, hold on, let me make sure, Dale, I've got you. Jackie, did you have anything else? I thought I saw her unmute.
No, not at this time. If I do, I'm sure I'll ask them. I'm making notes while we're writing or while
okay, awesome. All right, Dale, what you got?
So my first question is actually a follow-up to the first question we had. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Sunshine website, where anyone can go on and request anything from any organization. So we recently received a request that generated, it encompassed over 1 million emails. It took me about 2 weeks to pull it out of my archiver and get it moved to a place where our admin team could actually look at it. I know that there are ways, or we can charge, like if we have to load that onto a drive, we can charge for the cost of the drive to get it to the people. But our admin team did the math on this, and if they look through 5,000 emails a day, it's going to take them 5 years to get that data turned around. It was my opinion that 5 years worth of staff time is probably something that we could charge for, turn around, talk to the requester and say, hey, this is going to take a significant amount of staff time. We need to charge you for it. But it is the opinion of the city of Salisbury that we cannot charge for staff time. So
good question. There's a little nuance there. And actually, let me, what I'm going to do, you'll find that this is what I do in general, is I walk through my slide deck in a backwards kind of way. So I'm going to skip across some of these items. And so just so you know, when we talk about charging for those records, so just back to Jackie's point, as promptly as possible is what the law says. And yes, Dale, there is a statement that we can only charge direct cost, which would be the cost of paper, the cost of a drive that you put them on. However, there is an exception to that, which says if there is extensive clerical, administrative, or IT usage, you are allowed to create a rate and charge. And so I thought I had that in here. I'm trying to figure out where I've got that. Here we go. And so these are the charges piece. So it is actually in General Statute 132. It states that. So it states about actual direct cost. And then it says you can't charge for normal personnel time. By the way, you can also not just outsource it to somebody else and try to charge for that purpose. But when you're talking about 1 million records and going through those, at that point, I believe it would warrant a discussion about, is that extensive clerical or administrative or technology sort of support work that has to be done? And if so, there is a way to charge for that. Ultimately, what the law says is that if that charge is not something that the requester is comfortable with, they can take that all the way up to the state CIO to arbitrate whether or not that cost is fair. So there is a vehicle for charging. What you cannot charge for, and this one is the one that gets everybody, you cannot charge for separating out or redacting commingled records. And that is where—
Okay, and that's what, yeah.
So, and so, for example, what we mean by commingled records is not, I have emails in my email account that are personal in nature or that are confidential in nature versus I have emails that fall under the public records laws, right? So things I would have to produce. That's not what we would consider commingled records. What we would consider commingled records are where I start off an email with something confidential that needs to be redacted. And then below that would be something that would be public in terms of the public records law. So that's the way it's within the same record. One email is a record. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What is considered extensive as far as administrative or?
They don't define it. The law simply says extensive. So in Dale's case, I would say that's extensive. I mean, 1 million records to review. Again, I would have gone back to the requester and said, can you narrow the scope? Because it's going to take us this long to produce it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the nature of the requester is completely anonymous. So we have no way to contact the requester to try and narrow down their request.
Right. So at that point, you just take your 5 years worth of time, and because you don't have any way to contact them to charge either.
Right. Yeah.
You also, doesn't sound like you have a way to contact them to get them what they asked for either.
Well, so we can, it's like an anonymous broker. Anybody can go to this anonymous broker and put in an anonymous request, and then the broker approaches the organization and says, hey, this request came in, we need this data. And what happens is once that data is furnished to the broker just puts it on their website so that anybody can access it.
Oh, Dale, for some reason,
Can then get it.
Oh, there you go. Okay, your audio dropped for a second, but it came right back.
Yeah, I've got these super awesome Bose headphones, and they have Alexa built in. So anytime that they think I say Alexa.
Okay, that's awesome. That's really funny.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying, but I like the headphones. They work really well. So my second question, I haven't ran into this too much yet, but we are looking at moving some more of our stuff into like cloud-based platforms. One of the platforms that we're looking at is Granicus. As for doing like our records management, our agenda packets for council. And they've got some really cool communications features built in. where, you know, staff members can talk to each other and it ties it to that packet, it ties it to the agenda item, and it's really neat. But all of that stuff is all maintained within Granicus. It's not going through. What's our responsibility for cloud-based providers and managing those?
Yeah, your responsibility is 100%. You don't get to say, I can't produce it because it sits in a storage unit. It is your responsibility. You are the custodian of that record, regardless of whether you've outsourced your email to Gmail, whether you're using Office 365, whether you're using Granicus. So you have a contractual obligation with the third-party provider. And part of that obligation is for you to be able to access and produce records upon request.
Okay, that's what I thought, and that's what I was working with them towards. I just wasn't sure if there was a way I could weasel out of that.
No, unfortunately, there's actually a pretty famous lawsuit. It involves town of Kitty Hawk, I feel like, versus the Virginian newspaper. And it's really applicable because what they tried to say was all of our public records are in the possession, custody, or control of the contract attorney we use because they didn't have an on-site attorney at the time. And the newspaper said that's bogus because it's actually you that signed the contract with them. That would be like claiming it was sitting in a storage unit. And right, like you actually had paper records and you would put them in a storage unit you were renting. So you can't claim that I don't have access because you do actually have possession, custody, or control.
Right. Yeah, we still have the ability to provide email records and like chat records. That's just one more thing that we're going to have to pull.
And I would be really cognizant of reminding people that they are creating public records when they engage in those chats, because that is particularly nerve-wracking to me. And so Nancy asked, do you mean pulling the comments on the agenda items? And I think Nancy does mean that. Dale means, I believe, staff members' comments as they're prepping the agenda items, right?
Right. So it's like an instant messenger basically built into the cloud platform. And it ties those messages to that packet or to the agenda item or to whatever you're talking about. And I believe that council members actually can communicate on that platform as well.
Nancy, do you have any questions on that, or was that?
Wouldn't that fall under like the provision that says it's past its usable lifespan, like a chat that says, here's the PDF that went into the packet, you know?
Good question, Matthew. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to walk y'all through this because a lot of what you're talking about is embedded in the slide deck. And we're going to get to Matthew's point, which is what we would consider to be short-term administrative value. There's a little wrinkle in using that language right now, and I'm going to show you the wrinkle in just a second. But just to get sort of a sense of where folks are on understanding where you're at in terms of your understanding of the public records law, I just want to see where you guys sit. So on your like picture of yourself, there's a way to actually click yes or no. And so our personal emails sent or received on work equipment, meaning I'm using my work email account, I use my work computer, I use my work cell phone to transact emails that are personal in nature, not related to work. Maybe you're sending your spouse or your mom or your dad or your kid a message on email. Are those things public records? Or you can drop it in the chat. I'm so glad y'all are in this class. I'm a little sad that some of you are getting it wrong since you went through my class, but those of you who don't remember the answer, no, things that are sent that are personal in nature are not public records. Now, let me be clear. if you've signed a Fourth Amendment waiver as part of which some of y'all probably wrote for your organization saying nothing I do on work-related equipment is actually my property and I have no right to privacy on that. If you've signed that waiver, then your boss plus the IT department, right? Like whomever is in control of the way you spend your time at work, they might have the right to go in and look at those messages because you've signed a Fourth Amendment waiver, which is unreasonable search and seizure. However, under a public records request, those items should never be produced. And what do I mean by public records request? I mean, an email comes in from anonymous, from the newspaper, from whomever asking, and I'll give you a really finite example that actually came from a local government IT department. A local government IT director called me up and said, I have an employee who's going through a divorce. That employee, the spouse believes that they were having an affair with somebody else employed at our county. And they have made a public records request for all emails sent and received between these two people. And the short answer is, unless it was pertaining to work, you don't release it. Now, if their attorney wants to go and do an e-discovery filing on the email systems, that's a different discussion. But personal emails, things that are personal in nature. And so at the very beginning, when we were talking about commingled data or commingled records, I said, you know, what if I start off like I always think about this, I'm terrible at it. So it's really, I'm really aware of the fact that I'm terrible at it. But like, you know, if I said, hey, Dale, how's it going in Salisbury? How's your kids? How's your wife? Right? Like if I asked him personal things, and then I drop down to the next paragraph and I get to the meat of why I'm emailing him, which is the work related stuff. That stuff at the top is not work related. Do most people redact it? No. Could they redact it? Yes. Especially if I had put something in there personal, right? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Shannon, that your son is suffering from X disease. You would definitely want to remove that, right? But that might be part of a normal conversation if they're close working relationships. And so that would be something you would want to redact. So lesson number 1, personal emails should not be produced under a public records request. All right, so the answer is no, I've given you that. What about text messages sent on personally owned devices that relate to government business? Are those public records? So
I think people have learned in just the last 90 seconds.
Yeah. So the key here is, if you're saying no, the answer is actually yes. So if it is personal, it doesn't matter where it sits. It doesn't matter if it's my personal Gmail account or if it's on, like, this is my phone that I use personally. I don't get money from the School of Government for it, but I transact public business on this all day long. Some of you have texted me and asked me questions. It is absolutely related to work, therefore it is a public record. Now, if Darren emails me or texts me on my phone and asks me, hey, what's new? Did you watch the UFC fight this weekend? That's not a public record. Just because he and I have a work relationship doesn't make it a public record, because we also have a social relationship, right? But the minute I engage in a text message about work content, doesn't matter where that message sits, it is a public record. If you don't believe me on this one, just go Google public records request, elected officials, Mecklenburg County, Union County Sheriff. There's like 15 different ones. There were massive lawsuits over this in this state about what constitutes a public record. And a lot of people got into some challenge situations because they weren't saving those records and producing them upon request. I will tell you right now, it's not your job in IT to produce their records. So let me be clear. Y'all are not the custodian of their personally owned devices. And I don't care what SMARSH tells you. SMARSH cannot actually, number one, SMARSH cannot collect iMessages. And nobody in their right mind that's paying for their own cell phone plan is going to let you turn off iMessage if they're using an Apple product, right? And so ultimately, the best you can do as an IT professional, as a CIO, is say, hey, look, if it's a public record, you, the custodian of that record, meaning the sender or receiver, are responsible for keeping up with that record and putting it into a format that we can then produce upon request. And there's lots of ways to do that, and we'll talk through this. Okay, so the short answer was yes. The word that is operative here, or the words, are public business or official business. It doesn't matter where it sits, doesn't matter if it's a personal email account, a public email account, a government provided email account, a personal cell phone, a publicly funded cell phone. If it transacts public business, it is a public document. It is a public record, unless an exception applies. Okay, the required retention of email. How long do we have to keep emails related to public business? You might not actually know this one. Some of you will think it's 5 years. Some of you will think it's forever. Some of you think it's 10 years. Now, if you're a state agency, let me tell you that you might be in a slightly different space. And Jackie, I'm going to come back to your question in a second. The short answer is no, you cannot. Yes, you can hire somebody actually, but you can't use their salary to calculate and justify charges. You can't charge for staff time. Okay, Chris, good job. Absolutely right. It's based on content. If you're a state agency, you fall under a slightly different requirement. And by the way, if you're a state agency, they're already archiving your stuff for what you need to be doing, so you don't have as much concern about it. But the short answer is it's going to depend on content. So records retention is all content based. There is no retention schedule for email as email. Right? Because you might have email pertaining to an HR situation that needs to be kept for longer than an email where somebody is sending in a citizen complaint. So if you got an email that was a citizen complaining, the retention schedule states that citizen complaints and citizen service requests have a 1-year retention schedule. 1 year. That's all you have to keep it. So at that point, you could delete it, right? By the way, there's no technology solution for this. We've tried for years to build buckets and create ways to delete that. There's just no way to do it. And so I've often said that I think email archiving is the devil for a variety of reasons, but it makes it really hard because people keep their records forever. I was involved in a ransomware event for the last month. And when I was there, the first day I was on site with them, I explained to the folks that their email server was gone and there was no backups. Everything was encrypted. There was no way to recover anything. Slight aside, as IT professionals, you know that the OST files were sitting on the desktop, so we could pull some of those. But I didn't want to promise them anything. So I said, you need to think that the email is gone forever. Right? And then if I can give you your OSTs and transition those into PSTs and then put them into O365 or something, awesome. But ultimately, you should consider them gone. And a woman literally started crying. And she was like, but I saved everything forever in my email. And I thought, oh my God, IT really does not like you, right? Because they're your storage nightmare. And she started crying because she said, those are my CYA. And I was like, well, that's not a great practice for CYA. Okay. Next one, if a citizen asks you to come up with and create maybe an Excel spreadsheet, so they want a list of every state, out-of-state trip that the IT staff and or the CIO have taken, destination, mode of travel, amount of reimbursement in an Excel file for the past 5 years. Is that a public record, right? The short answer to that one is easy. Yes, that would be a public record, right? Because it's involving public business. All of that is public business. Now, do you have to do it in the way that they have suggested? Maybe you have a system, probably some of you do, where you go in and it's a database and you fill out the information and it includes all of this and they could query the database and they could produce this. At the School of Government, We do not do it this way. We have individual spreadsheets that we fill out and we email to somebody to get reimbursed for our mileage, et cetera. And so in those situations, I could say you can have all the employees' individual Excel files, and then you can create your own record that looks like you want it to look. But I don't actually have the obligation to create a new record. Now, querying a database, from a school of government standpoint, we do not consider a simple query of a database to be creating a new record. If somebody asked me to join two disparate databases together with some sort of API and then query it, yes, that's creating a new record, but you don't have to create a new record when people are requesting it.
So if they asked you to create a new record,
you can charge them. You can charge them whatever you want.
okay.
So if they ask you to create a new record, now let me explain. What does a new record mean? I mean, it doesn't exist in that format, right? So if they asked me for a PowerPoint and I gave them a PDF of the PowerPoint, could they come back and say, I want it as a native PowerPoint file? The answer is yes. You actually have to produce it that way because that's the way it was originated, right? Regardless of whether they can change it, by the way. Doesn't matter that they could change what the PowerPoint says when you send it to them in a native format. Doesn't matter. You still have to produce it.
So what if we, I guess what if they're very specific as far as we're going to have to create a query, but it's going to be a query that's going to include multiple table joins and different things. Can we charge for those?
So are they all in the same database? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, they would be in the same database, but it's hours worth of work because it's extremely complicated.
When you start talking about hours worth of work, then potentially you could charge for that. If you're just simply writing a query against an existing database, then I think that's where, now, I mean, I guess in the world of like the Munis, Tyler Technologies, right, where they have these really humongous databases that all sit in different areas. If you were trying to write something to join data together from multiple places, that may be a reason to charge because that is a very special request.
Yeah, we ran into that recently is why I'm asking, and it took us one person almost 2 weeks to get it done.
So what was the request specifically?
It was a request for a large amount of data from one of our systems, and it did require multiple joins, and it was very specific about certain people. So we had to not only figure the joins out, but we had to figure out how to stratify by those individual categories that they wanted.
Yeah, so at that point, and is it something, this is a nuanced question that's going to matter to a lot of you in just a second, but is it something that was already available for them to search on the web, like on your website?
No.
Okay. If you had said yes, for example, let's say you publish your arrest records and mugshots online, right? You put those out there on your government site. If you do that, the law has gotten changed in the last couple of years, thanks to the Register of Deeds. They got together and got the law to change. And it says, if you put it in a format that means people can view it and download it, even if that download is a PDF and they don't like it, then you no longer have to produce a record in that area. The record already exists. It's up to them to download that PDF and to convert it into whatever format they wanted. And if it's something above and beyond that, then you can charge them for it. So yeah, I think, Jackie, you could have charged a small amount based on what you just explained. Okay, so the General Statute 132 is the one you want to get to know. It's the one that matters the most in all of this because it's laying out what is a public record. It's everything. It's anything made or received in the transaction of public business. And it applies to all of us that work in the government space. right? And so even if you don't see the word up here, I had a sheriff tell me that I was wrong, that text messages were not public records, regardless of the fact that he lost a lawsuit stating that they were, because the word text message was not in this first line. And I said, sir, do you believe emails are public records? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I don't see the word email up here either. And I thought I was going to get shot, but I didn't. So it was a good day. So that's just, this is what the law is, right? This is the way we think about the law. Anything made or received in the transaction of public business, regardless of where the record sits, is subject to public access unless an exception applies. And there's only a handful of exceptions that exist. So it could be a paper record. It could be a voicemails. Like, I don't want to stress anybody out, but voicemails are public records. Sorry. Matthew I ruined his entire life right now.
Yeah, you kind of did. Because those things aren't gone.
By the way, it's not your job to worry about that stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Just deliver voicemail to the mailbox, so it makes it easy.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it comes to there, so the problem is, under a public records request, I bet most of you, and Thomas, if you're still here, I'm thinking about the city of Raleigh. I don't remember if y'all have unified messaging or not, but I know Brandon, y'all's attorney, and I talked a lot about unified messaging, because when it saves to your voicemail, when a voicemail comes into your email, it's a WAV file. And some places have the technology to query the WAV file for keywords, but a lot of y'all don't. Right? And so if you don't have that feature, who's going to listen to the WAV files? What I would probably do if it were me is I would say, these are the records that we have produced upon your request, excluding those text messages. So how long should they be saved? The answer is, it depends. It depends on the content of the voicemail. For example, if somebody calls and says, hey, this is Joe, can you give me a call back at my telephone number? That is a basic short-term kind of value. I'm not worried about that one. If somebody calls and says, officer in car number 343 was speeding through my neighborhood and almost hit Fluffy while she was out on her walk. By the way, Fluffy's a cat, not on a leash in a city where they require leashes. And so you already got a whole different situation going on there. And you have to investigate, right? Like, law enforcement has to investigate whether officer in car 343 was actually speeding. So at that point, that is a citizen complaint. So there should be a record of that complaint. Now I'm going to tell you the best news that you've ever heard. You don't need to save this from an IT standpoint. We as IT professionals need to get out of this business.
Yeah, but you know that's not going to happen.
Well, here's how I would do it. I would say every department needs to have a policy about how they handle things like voicemail. All you need, maybe you do come up with a solution since Darren popped up. So Darren, here's my solution. You're talking about workflow and building workflows. You just build them a log form. And when a voicemail comes in that constitutes a citizen complaint, that log form they fill out. Cindy Lou from 123 Main Street called in and left a voicemail at this time on this date, complaint about this, resolution to the complaint, officer was not speeding, we gave her a ticket for her cat not being on a leash, right? So that's the way I would handle it. I would put the onus back on the person who actually got the voicemail. So for me, I know the law pretty darn well because I teach it all the time. The way I handle it is, if a voicemail comes in that isn't just, hey, can you call me back? It's something bigger than that, something that really constitutes a public record. I like to send myself an email. I just say voicemail and like in the subject line, I send it to myself, voicemail, and I just quickly transcribe those key pieces that I just laid out, right? So from so-and-so on this date about this topic, and if there's a resolution to it. To me, that's just the easiest way to deal with it.
My comment was mainly about email and stuff. It is always going to be IT's.
Yeah. And email is
Okay.
a nightmare, but I was just coming up with a solution.
But for voicemail, no, that's a good solution.
If you don't have the record saved, Mary Johnson wants to know what can be done. Meaning to get them back, or what can be done to you? To you. Okay. So fascinatingly enough, there is a law that states that it is a criminal offense to willfully destroy public records. Now, that being said, has anybody ever been sued or found criminally negligent for willful destruction of public records? Only a few, and not related to not saving voicemails. Like, I can tell you that right now, right? So same ransomware event that I've been working for the last month. One of the things we've realized is their records are gone. I mean, there's nothing left. They cannot recover. And so what we did, I called the Attorney General's office and talked to the Attorney General's office. And then I called the archives, cultural resources archives, and I talked to them, and we came up with a plan of attack for basically, it's called a destruction log, for creating a destruction log about the fact that these records were unrecoverable. And then they sign off on it, which means that they won't, in the event of litigation, it doesn't stop somebody from suing you, because people can sue for any reason they want to, but it does give you protection. And what the state told me, because the people that would actually sue you would be the Attorney General's attorney that specifies in records would sue on behalf of cultural resources, local government record retention unit, for willful destruction. And she said, I would never sue somebody who had gone through that, just like I wouldn't sue if their courthouse burned down, right? So that's just, it's not the norm to do. I'm not asking you guys to become the experts on public record. I just want you to know enough about how to push back, because I hate that everybody expects IT to handle all things related to public records. It is actually the sender and the receiver. The custodian of the records of the office would be the department head. So really, as the IT professional, the only records that you are actually the custodian of are your own records, and records, if you're the IT director, the records of the department, log files, other things, POs, etc., things like that. Those you would be the custodian of. Anything else, the fact that you are the service provider for an email solution does not make you the record, the custodian of that record. Sandy, again, the answer doesn't change. You have to keep them to whatever the content requires. So when an employee is no longer employed there, their messages would have to be kept based on the content of the communication, because that's what the retention schedule says. It does not say anything about I have to keep it for 2 years until after somebody leaves. There's no law that says that. It's simply based on content. Okay, I think I've already hit on this one, but the public record kicks in based on the content of the record, not where the record sits. Okay, whoops, I went backwards. Sorry about that. So we've already talked about the obligation. Provide it to anybody who requests it as promptly as possible, and the medium requested if possible, right? So PDF versus PowerPoint, etc. Charge only the direct cost. North Carolina is really unique. We do not force people to say who they are. We don't make them prove where they live. We don't make them give their real name or any type of information about themselves. Anybody can request records from North Carolina entities. Virginia, for example, they require you to prove residency before they'll produce records for you. Here, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what the motive is. So somebody asked about exceptions. So here's some exceptions. There's two different kinds of exceptions. There's doesn't have to provide it, but if you want to, you could, or shall not provide it, and you may not do so by law. So trade secrets, Coca-Cola's trade secret, right? Whatever that is. Social security numbers, certain types of personnel information about minors participating in parks and recreation programs. That's a very specific one that's called out. Those things shall not be provided, meaning cannot be provided, and therefore must be redacted before you produce the records request. Things that don't have to be provided, but if you choose to do so, that's on you. Economic development information. There was actually a really interesting case a couple of years ago now, where the city, as a city and county, went in together to provide some economic development incentives. And One party said, we're not going to produce those records because we don't have to. The law gives us, a way to say we don't have to. And the other party, I think the city didn't produce them and the county did, or vice versa. And it created like a little bit of a, disagreement between the city and the county. But those are the two types of exceptions that exist. So this framework for analyzing a public records request is really useful, at least from my perspective, which is, okay, does the record exist, right? If it doesn't exist, you don't have to make it. I've already made that pretty clear. So you don't have to disclose anything. If it does exist, then you go to number 2. Is it related to public business? If no, then you don't have to produce it. If it does relate to public business, you go to number 3. Is there an exception? If there is an exception, then you don't have to provide it. I mean, if there is an exception, you may not have to provide it. If there's no exception, you just have to provide it, right? And so then they say, does the exception apply to the entire record, right? The whole email, or only certain amounts of information in that email? And does it prohibit disclosure, or does it deny the right of access, right? So sometimes they'll say, we won't give it to you, but you can come in and look at it, right? So body cam footage is a really good example of that. We're not going to give it to you for you to then distribute out to whomever, but you can come inside of our chambers and you can see the body cam footage. So that's a way to think about that. So if the prohibition applies to the entire record, you don't disclose it. If it applies to some information within the record, then you redact that part, and you can't charge for the redaction, right? So that's another key piece. There is, much to everyone's dismay, no exception for drafts. Drafts are public records. So if you have a draft email, if you're like me and you get fired up, apparently Ted said I was going to teach a class on how to curse at vendors. I don't curse at them, I'm just sort of aggressive sometimes. But if I have drafted an email like I do on occasion, and then I walk away from it trying to catch my breath and make sure I'm not going overboard, and then I come back, if somebody were to request a record during that and they said, we want to see drafts, if it was still sitting there, I would have to produce it. Now, if it was an empty email and I just had written good morning, that one is not relevant. It's when there's a draft that is substantive that I would have to produce it. Somebody wants to see a draft of the board minutes, you have to produce them, or your clerk does, not you guys. So that's just useful to know. We've already talked about charges. The retention schedule is something that Cultural Resources, the Records Retention Unit, puts out, and they tell you how long things have to be kept. Personal messages don't have to be kept. Even email ones don't have to be kept, right? So that's something that is important to know. Now, Matthew raised this issue about short-term value earlier. Here's the little nuance that's happened. In 2015, Cultural Resources changed the language that we all operate under. And now they say you have to go through and designate the retention period by which you are following this policy. So it used to say when short-term administrative value ends. Now, what it actually says is destroy in office when reference value ends, agency policy, destroy in office after blank. That blank has to be filled out. It's not filled out by you. It is filled out by whomever in your organization is sort of the head of the organization. Because if you look at who has to sign, this is a sheriff's one for example, the sheriff has to sign off it and the board chair has to sign off on it for counties. If it's just the local government, like the local county or the local municipality, it would be the city or county manager and the chair or the mayor of that governing board. If your agency has not filled in that little line with numbers, 1 day, 30 days, whatever number they've come up with, if they have not filled that out, the last sentence is unbelievably important for you. If you don't establish internal procedure or policies and retention periods, the local government agency is not complying with the provision of this retention schedule. And therefore, you cannot destroy those records. So I just want you to know that that's there. Okay. Records retention for social media. This is another one that's, catches folks off guard. Here's the really interesting thing. If it is a repost, there is no requirement for you to keep a secondary copy. So let's say, if you haven't heard, Facebook now allows you to turn off comments on posts. If you don't know about that, we should probably talk about that some other time, but just know that every single post on Facebook, you now have the feature to turn off comments, or, well, I guess it's to set comments only to those people who are tagged in the post. So if your agency does not want to allow comments, they need to choose that every single time. My advice is don't allow comments and then decide to shut them down after a little while, because that will get you sued on a First Amendment violation in about 2.3 seconds. But if you don't want to allow comments and you are simply reposting something that was already posted, for example, Catawba County's newsletter, it is a newsletter that goes out by email. This is just a repost. Reposts don't have to be kept. Even my thumbs up really don't have to be kept. There's no reason to keep those records. I don't care what Archive Social tells you. I'm telling you what North Carolina law is. So you don't have to keep those things, right? Now, in this case, a citizen went on and complained about the flu clinic, said they should have given it earlier. I already told you citizen complaints and service requests have to be kept for a year after the date of resolution. Well, your resolution is you read this and said she should have gone to CVS and got her kid inoculated there instead of waiting on us. Boom, moved on, right? You could create a log file. You don't have to keep it as a screenshot from your social media account. You don't have to use a provider to keep these things for you. So if people are, I have a sort of short way of describing public records law in North Carolina. It's not legally accurate, but it does make a whole lot of sense. When people say good things about the government, like way to go, good job, you can delete it almost instantly based on your policy. When they say something negative, the minimum retention is 1 year. That just is the way it sort of falls out. Your personal Facebook. So we were talking about personal messages, or not personal messages. We were talking about transacting public business over personally owned or operated devices. Your personal Facebook account is operated by you. Even if you say where you work, it doesn't create a public record up until the point that you engage in communications about public business. So I always advise folks not to do this. In this case, there was a police chief who was sitting in a meeting, a board meeting. A citizen could see that he was sitting in the meeting. And so he Facebook messaged on the police chief's personal account, not related to his work, asking a question about a golf cart ordinance. When the chief responds, he has now created a public record, and he is now responsible for keeping that record in accordance with whatever the statute requires. I will tell you, if you send me a Facebook message, I will send you a note back and say, I don't engage in business communications over Facebook. I have taken your message, copied and pasted it, and dropped it into my work account, my email account, and I will respond to you that way. So that's just the way I handle it. Some people turn off their messenger because that also makes sense. Here's another example, right? Police chief in this case is getting texted by a council member, right? All of these things are going to rise up to a point of being a public record. I'm asking a question. I was going to teach a class for them, and I was just making sure what he actually wanted me to cover. And so in all of these cases, a citizen's complaining about traffic, speed bumps, that's 1 year resolution. People are complaining about rush hour traffic, 1 year resolution. Me texting about, hey, am I on the right track here from a professional standpoint in terms of what you want me to cover? That would be considered short-term or reference value, which has to be specified in their policy. Lots of ways to keep this, right? Again, these records, I think having a good policy is more important than having technology, because the technology isn't going to fix the issues, right? The technology is only going to make things a little more easy to find, but the technology doesn't allow you to get people's personal Facebook accounts. It doesn't allow you to see their Gmail accounts that they use at home for work purposes. And it sure doesn't let you see those text messages. So it's better to have a good policy informing people about their responsibilities vis-a-vis the records they create or respond to. And then after that, after you've got those things in place, you could have a technology solution. You can use the plain old print, screen print, screenshot with a time and date stamp. You can use the log file that I've already mentioned. Some people like to forward it if they get a message on a personally owned device, they forward it to a public account, which to me works quite well. Android backs up text messages for free to Gmail, which was useful, but there are tools that will do that for iPhone as well. If you're texting your boss to inform them that you're out, I would say that is not a public record at that point, because they're most likely going to write down somewhere that you're not coming in. And so if the newspaper wanted to say, I'd like to see evidence of, the number of days that Jackie took off from work for sick leave, vacation leave, whatever. If somebody requested that, then they would just produce the total number and it would be pulled from your HR department's records. It would not be based on those kinds of text messages back and forth. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm sure the next 6 minutes have tons of questions.
So Shannon,
Yeah.
Our board likes to have all of our board members have Nash County email addresses.
Yeah.
They like to not check those mailboxes. They want their email messages forwarded to their personal accounts. I know that that's not the best practice, and I know that that puts the obligation on them to produce anything that a public records request comes in for. However, my question is, do we have an obligation, does Nash County have an obligation to hang on to those emails that we're forwarding to their personal account so that we can produce them if a public records request comes in?
Yes, because it's originating, yes. And then they have an obligation, if they respond to that message, to produce that as a record upon request.
Okay, but we need to make sure that we are keeping a copy of the forwarded email that's going to them. Because we don't, it puts us in a position of having an unmonitored mailbox because nobody's going to be checking that or deleting it or cleaning it up. So those email addresses are just going to keep growing that mailbox.
So it's coming in as an email, and then you're forwarding the actual email to the person. I mean, are you keeping the original email?
Well, that's my question. Do we need to?
Yeah, I think you have to keep the original email.
Okay. All right, well, that was my question.
Yeah, sorry. I know that was not the answer, but I would also put the burden back on those commissioners that they now have a responsibility when they reply to that message, because they're probably going to, the easiest way to do it from a technical standpoint is they reply and they also copy their work account, right? The one y'all provided for them, because then it goes into your email archiver and you can search it, etc. When they choose to use their personal Gmail account and send a response to Citizen X, then they've now engaged in the transaction of public business. And ultimately, if a request comes in, they're going to have to be able to produce that request. So they would be better off to just carbon copy their work email account or their government email account.
True. Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if this is relevant or not, but one thing I've been having to do recently is identify PII in some of my databases. So what constitutes PII in North Carolina?
So hold on, good question. There's federal law, there's state law, there's all kinds of law that decides what PII is. If you're talking about state law, PII is, I think, defined by the Attorney General's office. And I'm trying to think what PII is. So it is worthwhile to know that PII in North Carolina in particular, or that breaches in North Carolina actually only include certain types of things. And so like a social security number would be one. Your work email account is not one. Your telephone number would not be considered one. Your banking information, like your account number plus routing number, probably would rise to the occasion of being PII. Your social security number absolutely is protected. So that's something that just you should know that that one, and certainly anything that would constitute like a HIPAA information, like health information, would be your password, interestingly enough, for your email account would not be considered PII.
Excuse me,
Internet
Shannon.
account numbers.
So we've got less than a minute to go.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to read our closing sponsor, but the meeting can stay open for a little while if you guys want to continue the conversation. That is just fine.
I'm going to drop my email in to the chat as well.
Okay.
And my cell phone. That way everybody has it. If you message me, if you text me, I'm still going to turn it into a public record, just so you know. Like, I hope I made that clear.
All right. So Sentinel-1 is the only cybersecurity solution encompassing AI-powered prevention, detection, response, and hunting across endpoints, containers, cloud workloads, and IoT devices in a single autonomous XDR platform. With Sentinel-1, organizations gain full transparency into everything happening across the network at machine speed to defeat every attack at every stage of the threat cycle. So thank you guys for attending. Like I said, stay right here and talk to Shannon for a little while longer. Otherwise, go visit our business partners, and we'll see you in the next meeting.
And if you don't want to talk to me right now, you can email me, text me, call me. I will answer any way that I need to.
Awesome.
All right.
Shannon, I had one person comment that you're the smartest woman they've ever heard speak.
That's the saddest statement I've ever heard.
Shannon, you are ridiculously intelligent on a huge variety of topics.
I feel so stressed out. Okay, Michael, let me give it to you again. It's my last name. It's Tufts, like the university, Tom, Uncle Frank, Tom, Sam, at unc.edu.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, absolutely. Darren, do we have a place we're putting the slides?
You can put them in the files. So when you go to your meeting, because you're a speaker, you can upload the files to the files section of this course.
Okay, I can do that. I will get that done ASAP.
The files will be there, and a recording of this will be there. They'll be living on this website for a year for people to go back and see the files and the video.
Awesome.
So I have a quick question. It may not be quick, but so Gmail and a couple other services have these, what they're calling confidential modes, that you can send not a encrypted email, but it has a temporal timestamp on it that it will disappear from the senders, or you can, use SMS messages to request access to the email.
Yeah.
How would you, if it's protected or encrypted in such a way that you couldn't read it as the, like the archiver, how would we know if we're missing that in a public records request? Typically my department only uses it to send passwords. But I'm thinking, like, if somebody were trying to do it for another reason.
You wouldn't be able to decrypt it, is what you're saying.
Possibly not. I haven't tested it, but this is a feature that's been in Gmail for I think 2 or 3 years now. So, but it just got me thinking about it today when you were doing the presentation.
So I actually had a whole long discussion with a Sunshine attorney last week about the fact that a lot of people are using Viper for police and law communications. That traffic is becoming encrypted, so scanners aren't picking it up. And she was trying to argue that that was a public records violation. There's no violation there, because it's not there's no right to access it in real time, right? Like, they can't read the email as you're typing it, but what what you have to be able to do is decrypt it upon request if it has to be produced.
Okay.
So I would say the law would be not that you have to provide the decryption tool, but that the decryption key, but that you have to be able to decrypt it on your end and then produce it.
Okay. Now, if that's not the case, or it can't be decrypted on our end or after the fact, then we just have to not use that service.
I don't think that's
because
it was used before, or before you kind of had control of it.
Right. Okay, no, I was just kind of interested. It's just
Yeah.
something I thought about.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, y'all have a great rest of your day. I'm going to go take a 12-year-old to an orthodontist. Super fun.
Good luck with that.
Where are you? I feel like I should know where you are based on your email account.
I'm in Dare County.
Okay. That's where I
Out
know your email from.
all the way out here in the
Yeah, I love Dare County. Absolutely.
as
Love
far
it.
out as you can go without falling into the water.
Hey, look, between you and Logan, I'm just jealous. I just, you know, being
Yeah,
in Raleigh is no fun compared to you and Logan and Currituck.
yeah. I've talked to Logan quite a bit over here the past couple weeks.
He's
So
an awesome guy. He's awesome.
he's doing
Other
really
than the
good.
fact that he texts me all the time pictures of him sitting at the beach for his lunch break. And then I'm like, you're nice. Like, I don't want to see your yummy looking food and the ocean because that's what it is. I'm like, what is this? This is just torture.
Yeah. So we do have it pretty good out here. So
Yeah, y'all
but
do have it pretty good.
thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.